Before the violent events of the last couple of weeks in Louisiana, Minnesota, and Dallas, a young black man named Patrick Mumford stopped at a friend's home after work in the Sunset Park neighborhood of Savannah. That friend had a warrant, and 3 Metro police officers were on their way to serve it. What happened next became a classic tale of 2 cultures colliding. Each had his own reasons for why they responded to the situation the way they did, but one thing is clear: the body cam video many of you have already seen is anything but cut and dry. Tonight, I ask only one thing as you again view this video and the facts behind it. Open your mind. Be the cops. Be the suspect. But be aware that this is nothing unusual when it comes to cops and young black men and what they face in our community every day.
Y'all ain't let me know what's
Get out of the car. Go.
You have a warrant.
Right here, it's one of several times that Mumford appears to be reaching, this time behind the car seat. But for what? After viewing the tape himself, Chief Lumpkin says Mumford, quote, reached down toward the floorboard of the car in a manner which the officers perceived as a threat to their safety. Yet despite all of the climbing, the blocking, and the reaching, the officers here really do show amazing restraint. Yes, they're looking for the right opportunity to fire that taser. But how many times over the last several years has deadly force been used by police in this country because the suspect reached? Corporal Wilson and his officers have had enough. And the incident is over.
Handcuff him now. Handcuff him. You gotta get it again.
Start to finish, 90 seconds of fear, tension, uncertainty, misunderstanding. Mayor Deloche told me earlier the search for that super city manager could take between 8 months and a full year. So Stephanie Cutter's decision to stay on board during that transition should at least make it seamless and conciliatory. However, that may not be said about the council as a whole. Alderman Tony Thomas's Facebook post basically told the world that Stephanie Cutter was leaving 2 days ago. And he called into question the ethics of the mayor. Was this just a typical American city that you were looking at potentially jumping into, or a challenge that you said, oh yeah, this is right up my alley?
That's an excellent question, and I think the short answer is yes, it was a challenge that I felt was up my alley, and I was really willing to wrap my arms around.
There is no dirt on me. I live a clean, simple life, prefer to tell things the way I see it, and I sleep well at night. Why is it necessary to put that in a cover letter?
Well, the target is there because, listen, when you're in this type of position as an appointed public official, people are always expecting you to fail. And so I can't ever put myself or the city in a position where my personal behavior will bring embarrassment to the city or to my profession.
And this indicates you never have.
I never have.
You know, when you cast your vote inviting a person to represent your interests, the standards of conduct for that now elected official are instantly raised. What they do, who they associate with, are now a direct reflection of their ability to lead. For District 6 Alderman Tony Thomas, the accusations of misconduct have dogged him through most of his tenure on City Council. Now, just 2 months into his 4th term, those accusations and the accusers are surfacing once again in greater numbers than ever before. If there was ever a time for the alderman to step forward and address these allegations, it's now. But I want to warn you, the results of my 3-month investigation are about to reveal things that are inappropriate for younger ears.
1, 2, 4, 3.
By most standards, 6th District Alderman Tony Thomas has been a very good representative to the voters who have kept him in office since 1999. He can claim some credit for the completion of the Coffee Bluff Marina, a full-service skate park in his South Side district, and a number of other smaller projects constituents urge the alderman to support. But he must also take ownership for these hundreds of photographs and videos, many that he has posted to his own Facebook page over the years, perpetuating the image of a politician known for bar hopping, heavy drinking, and the companionship of dozens of teen boys, many not old enough to drive. For more than a decade and a half, he has shown up at local bars and restaurants surrounded by these young men, again posting the pictures to prove it. Thomas has documented for the world to see more than a dozen out-of-town trips, many on official city business, with some of these teens. taxpayer-financed conferences where other aldermen tell us he shared hotel rooms with these boys and young men.
Everybody was looking around saying, what's he bringing this kid with him for? And, you know, it was at the end of the conference, the majority of people on city council went to Michael Brown and said, look, tell him, you know, he can't bring young boys to these functions with him anymore.
Former Alderman Ellis Cook is recalling a League of Cities meeting Thomas attended in December of 2003. While every other alderman flew to Nashville, Thomas drove his own vehicle accompanied by this man, Josh Flowers, just 18 at the time. Flowers says the alderman hired him to help with his first campaign for re-election. During that Nashville trip and any other time the two were together, Flowers says he never had to ask for a refill when it came to alcohol.
There was a lot of drugs involved too, as far as Tony goes. There was a lot of cocaine.
Tony providing that cocaine?
Yes.
Flowers says despite Thomas's advances during that conference, nothing sexual happened. But on two separate occasions back in Savannah, each after a night of heavy drinking and cocaine use, Flowers says Thomas didn't ask.
There's two separate times where I woke up to him performing sex on me. And the first time I thought I made it very clear, you know, I'm not homosexual. This is not, you know, my cup of tea, so to speak. But the second time it became very clear that he was shooting for something more so.
Flowers says he thought his relationship with Thomas was as simple as employee-employer, but the paychecks that he was getting for the first few months were replaced with something he wanted more.
Eventually, it ended up going from being paid in cash, working for him, to being paid with drugs and alcohol, which was my vice at the time. And hindsight being what it is, I realized that was his way of getting a hold of me.
Yeah. In the meantime, Thomas continued to represent the city at events and conferences throughout the country, often with a young man or two at his side. These photos are from a League of Cities trip to Washington, D.C. in March of 2007. The young man here also accompanied Thomas to San Antonio, Texas for another League of Cities trip, this one in November of 2009, and again to the Florida Keys in 2010. After hearing these allegations, not only from Josh Flowers, but from no fewer than 3 other alleged victims, I wanted to make sure that I got Tony Thomas's response. The alderman has refused to talk to me about other issues in the past. However, this time he seemed eager, and I caught up with him at the last city council meeting.
They're accusing you of child sexual assault. They're accusing you of providing alcohol to a minor.
Yes.
They're accusing you of providing cocaine during party situations. Give me a response, because this is pretty serious stuff.
Well, you got to have evidence.
Yeah.
In today's world, you have to have evidence. So I would suggest that they go and get that evidence.
But you're denying that there was any of this that ever took place.
Absolutely.
One organization that isn't buying it is also one that supported the alderman's political career for years. Georgia Equality is the state's largest gay rights organization. Kevin Clark, its former senior board member. For the reputation of Georgia Equality, he says, they not only pulled that support this last election, they want justice for Savannah.
Truth has a way of always, ultimately, winning. Sometimes it takes many years, sometimes decades. But the truth finds a way to bubble up, and I will do whatever I need to do to make sure that Tony Thomas is arrested, prosecuted, and thrown in jail.
And Clark says he wants that for people like Chris Hope.
I met Tony when I was 14 years old. I was in 8th grade at Savannah Country Day School.
Chris Hope says he too needed a summer job when Thomas struck up a conversation with him at a local movie theater.
Took me to the mall. He bought me a pair of shoes, and we were in traffic, and he just said, why don't you need to give your daddy some sugar. And I was like, I'm sorry.
Hope says he could have never imagined a simple peck on the cheek then would lead to what happened a few weeks later, when he says the alderman invited him to clean up at his house after a day of filthy yard work.
Took my shower, drying off, went in, would get my clothes, put my clothes back on, and then I was forced to the bed, and he forced himself on me and started performing sex on me.
He says months and months of sexual payback followed. Hope never knew when, where, or how Thomas would demand that so-called sugar from the then 15 and 16-year-old. Moving on from that experience has not been easy.
It's ruined every relationship I've had. It drives you nuts.
What drives you nuts, Chris? Is it the fact that you participated
Well,
despite the fact you were emotionally unprepared to reject it?
Well, at that time, you don't know how to handle it, but then every day, you're shamed, all right? You don't want to tell anybody. If you do tell somebody, they'll probably kill them.
Right. Once again, for years, you could find dozens of pictures of Hope and other teens splattered across the alderman's Facebook page. Hope is the one behind the camera when this video was shot of what he says was an inebriated alderman, once again surrounded by several young men. But behind the scenes, his alleged victims, targets of pleasure, will tell you they were suffering then and still suffer to this day.
It'll mess you up. It'll mess you up, man.
Do you fear at all repercussions legally from Alderman Thomas for making these kinds of statements about him?
Bring it on.
Every victim, every former city official and employee, every source I spoke to for this investigation said exactly the same thing when I asked if they feared retaliation from Alderman Thomas for finally speaking out. And that reaction was, bring it on. Through multiple sources close to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office, I have also discovered that investigators are gathering piles of documents, interviews, and alleged victim contacts for possible criminal case against the alderman, even traveling to other states to track down those alleged victims. And a local Savannah attorney also gathering information and interviewing as many alleged victims as are willing to come forward for a possible civil lawsuit against Tony Thomas. For the most part, the beach is closed, the water is closed. Something else that Mayor Bilderman also said earlier today was that he will not risk the lives of his first responders coming out and assisting people during the storm. Everyone that walks out here is basically calling the conditions out here somewhat ominous. They know that Matthew is on the way in some form. We want to let everybody know that Tasia Reed is not an emergency responder and is not going to be out there driving around looking for people on the side of the road who should not have been out there driving on the interstate between Jacksonville and Pittsburgh in the first place in the middle of a hurricane. But we're glad that gentleman is okay. Listen, folks, there is no such thing as having been through every hurricane.
No.
Because, again, they're all different and each poses a unique set of threats to each and every one of us. Ken, thank you so much for that reporting out there. We do appreciate it, and I love hearing about the days in the 1930s when you were only in your teens.
Well, you know, we do have an update.
Why does he have to say that?
You weren't supposed to bring him
back.
back.
We're wrapping up.
He's trying to get that last jab in.
Good night, or good morning. What I am taking great pleasure in seeing is what appears to be a calm after this storm. It wasn't too long ago that this industry, these ships, these cranes, were a man's domain, and only a man's domain. But like so many other industries in this country, there was only so much pressure that glass ceiling could take before it would shatter, and it did. The persistence of a single woman was able to lift this industry and the hundreds of women who would follow into a brand new era.
This was like a man's world. You know, there was no women.
Not yet. The fact that not everyone was on board with the idea of putting a woman in a crane cabin was little more than inspiration to Carol.
The more they said I couldn't, the harder I tried, and the more I tried, the better I got, and I just, you know, I succeeded in it, and I loved it, you know.
She's also humble. Are you good at this?
I think I'm, you know, good enough to get by.
Carol Claxton is considered by most in this industry to be the first woman in America ever allowed in this seat. This week, the First Lady of Port Labor will lift her last container, espouse her final piece of advice, and hang up her hard hat for good. There's a small piece of property on a different river waiting for Carol, and retirement, well earned. Claxton retired on Friday, and of course we wish her all the best. Here we go. I don't know where I was going from there. Come back, come back, come back. Lawmakers are we have my own language as part of this as well, so just bear with me. Hey, I'm just telling it like it is, all right? Jesse Petrie. I knew that name was going to throw me. Boom. Klugh out.